Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I wish to begin by emphasizing how honored I feel to be here before this distinguished body and to provide testimony.
Bring me up. Thank you.
To provide testimony regarding my findings on the situation of human rights in the Sudan, in particular forms of contemporary forms of slavery and practices similar to slavery. Mr. Chairman, since 1993, when I have undertaken my mandate as a Special Rapporteur of the UN Commission on Human Rights, I received numerous reports and information and collected dozens of eyewitness testimonies indicating that contemporary forms of slavery, including the slave trade, forced labor, and servitude, are widespread and systematic practices condoned and tacitly approved by the government of the Sudan. I would like to share with you some of the evidence that I discovered supporting this conclusion. Different paramilitary units are fighting together with the army in southern Sudan and the Nuba Mountains area. These paramilitary units include the Popular Defense Forces, the PDF, created in November 1989, include groups of volunteers called Murahelin, and include Arab tribal militias armed and controlled by the government of the Sudan. Numerous reports and testimonies received during my missions to the Sudan and some neighboring countries with hundreds of thousands of Sudanese refugees indicate that members of these groups are carrying out systematically abductions of civilians during or after military operations. They are also providing armed guards for places where the victims are temporarily held and are also in charge of their transportation to the final destinations. A high-ranking PDF commander from Kadugli, the Nuba Mountains area, confirmed to me, for example, during an official meeting in 1993, that his troops are given orders to collect and transport civilians from the rebel-held areas to government of the Sudan-run refugee camps after taking over these villages from the rebels. There is evidence also on cases when army officers captured and brought with them to northern Sudan southerner children as servants in their households. The vast majority of the victims are women and children belonging to ethnic, racial, and religious minorities from southern Sudan and indigenous African tribes from the Nuba Mountains area. Women and girls are used as concubines or are forced to work for soldiers. Several cases of rape were reported even in camps for displaced run by the government of Sudan or organizations working with the government of the Sudan in the Kordovan area. Boys and young men are used mainly as servants. There are reports, and my own findings in the Nuba Mountains confirm these reports, that a number of people are obliged to work on large agricultural schemes run by individual landowners close to the government of the Sudan. The most exposed of all these categories of victims are members of the Dinka tribe living in northern Bahr al-Ghazal, especially the Dinka Gogria. I received, during my September 1993 visit to Wau, the capital of the former Bahr al-Ghazal state, dramatic eyewitness accounts on these practices. In the camps for displaced Dinka, situated around Wau, I have talked to people, mainly women, children, and elderly, who were in the worst shape I have ever seen human beings in my life. Inhuman and degrading treatment of the victims by their captors is widespread. Many victims of the mentioned violations and abuses are forcibly converted to Islam and are given Arabic names, but even with that, in many instances, their treatment is not improved at all. Local and central authorities are all well aware of this phenomena. In a number of cases, relatives of those abducted or local chiefs are making serious efforts to retrieve their relatives, sometimes with success. Local authorities are usually contacted but do not intervene, even if the owner is identified and his name is indicated. In a few instances, deals were reached between the owner or the captor and the claimants, and victims were released for compensation in money or goods. It is to be noted, however, that according to the Sudanese Criminal Act of 1991, abduction, kidnapping, forced labor, unlawful confinement, and unlawful detention are considered crimes. I am not aware, however, of any trial by a Sudanese court in such cases during the past years. It It is also to be mentioned that the Sudan is for decades a signatory party to both the 1926 Slavery Convention and the Supplementary Convention on the Abolition of Slavery, the Slave Trade, and Institutions and Practices Similar to Slavery, dated 1956. Taking into account all these circumstances, I cannot but repeat my conclusions from the last report to the UN General Assembly in November 1995, duly reiterated in my latest report released yesterday in Geneva. The abduction of persons, mainly women and children belonging to racial, ethnic and religious minorities from southern Sudan, their subjection to the slave trade, including trafficking and sale of children and women, slavery, servitude, forced labor and similar practices are taking place with the knowledge of the government of the Sudan. The manifest passivity of the government of the Sudan in this regard, after years of reporting and calls upon it by United Nations organs and international non-governmental organizations affiliated with the United Nations, and the subsequent lack of any measures to protect Sudanese citizens from these practices, lead to the conclusion that abductions, slavery, and institutions similar to slavery are carried out by persons acting under the authority and with the tacit approval of the government of the Sudan. The fact that the abductions take place mostly in a war-affected area is to be considered as a particularly aggravating circumstance in this case. Thank you.